Would you rather have this or this? We've recently purchased a hand blender. It's the Braun Multiquick 9, and this is the information, and as you can see from the box here, it comes with a assortment of attachments, and it's visible there. And we decided I needed some way of organizing all these attachments. Right now, in the packaging, they come in a lot of them come in a polystyrene packing, which kind of holds them in position, but it doesn't hold all the parts. There's also all of these pieces left over that aren't in there, plus another beaker and the manual. So I thought that polystyrene wouldn't last very long, and it's not very organized in any event. So I thought I'd try to make my own storage rack for all these. And so I've created a layout, a possible layout for the storage rack with all the parts fitting into it. And then I've made a copy of that, a second copy of that, so that I can make effectively 2 layers of plywood with holes suitably sized to fit all of the parts. Now, so I've started. I've cut a series of pieces of plywood that I will need for making the blender. Making the storage rack for the blender. And so over here I've got 3 pieces, each cut to 300 millimeters by 500 millimeters. 2 of them are 12 mil ply, and 1 is 7 mil. The 12 mil ply I'll be cutting the holes into for the implements, and the 7 mil is just a bottom base plate. In addition to that, I've cut 6 pieces of 22 millimeter doweling, which will act as supports between we'll be putting those between the 2 plates. So what I'll be doing is taking my design sheets and laminating those onto the piece of plywood temporarily, and then cutting out all of the openings, and then we'll put that all together. Although the storage unit I'm making is particularly for this model of Braun hand blender, it could be a similar rack could be set up for any other blender with a number of implements that needed to be stored. So we just follow the same general procedure, and I'm sure you could come up with a good solution. The tools and materials used in this project, in addition to the timber that's required, include a set of drill bits for making starter holes or centering holes, as well as starter holes for the cutouts for the scroll saw, a hand drill primarily for doing the drawer slides, as well as some screw bits, and all for centering the drill holes, hole saws, various hole saws for cutting some of the smaller openings in the board, a 22 millimeter speed bore drill bit for drilling the post holes, although a Fresnet drill bit would be better, but if I had one. Also tape measure and ruler for laying out the drawer slides if you're using those. Some spray adhesive for mounting the template onto the boards prior to cutting, and then a hot air gun for heating the glue and removing the template after you're finished, and some mineral turpentine for removing any glue residue. Although you could probably just use a belt sander to remove the template and glue. In any event, belt sander is good to clean up the board afterwards. In addition to that, I've used a serradial arm saw, or you could use a chop saw if you had them, for cutting some of the smaller pieces, as well as a circular saw for cutting the boards to size initially, although you could probably do all that sawing with a hand saw if you had to. And then there's a scroll saw for cutting out the openings in the board, and a drill press for cutting the holes with the hole saw, as well as all the other drilling on the boards to keep the holes straight. Now for painting, I used acrylic water-based paint, so I had some brushes and a small roller to make a neater job, as well as a painting tray, and a bit of sandpaper for cleaning up some of the surfaces, cutouts, and a drum sander for sanding, rounding out the scroll saw cut hole openings. And that's about all the tools required. Although you could probably do it with fewer tools than this. You can see on this layout I've made a space for each part. Most of the parts will have the same opening on the top board and on the lower board, but in a few cases the lower board will have a smaller opening, particularly to fit the lower end of those implements. And each of those I have drawn in the lower level in grain so that I can keep in my mind which one I need to cut when I do the cutting out of the sections. Some of the cutouts in the board were done with a scroll saw, so they're not perfectly smooth and round. So I've come up with a drum sander that I've made myself out of a few pieces of hole saw cutouts like these, and glued them together and drilled a hole down the middle, put a bolt through it, and put a thin cut line down one side where I could tuck the sandpaper in. And then if I just pop that in the chuck of my drill press and set this so that it's below the level of the board. And I could just sand it around, smooth it around. And that's much smoother now. I've now glued the backing board onto the base and also put in the posts, glued in the posts for the top plate. I've taped off the tops of these so that I can now paint all this before I assemble it, and won't get paint on where I want to glue it. And I've also filled those post holes with newspaper so they'll keep the paint out of there. So now I'll go ahead and paint these up, and then they'll be ready to assemble. The painting is done now, so I've got this ready just to assemble. So I've left the tops clear for the gluing, and I'm just now ready to put those two together and touch up the tops of the posts, and it'll be pretty much done. I've also made a couple of extra pieces for making some sliders for in the drawer sliders for in the cupboard. And there we have the finished Braun Multiquick 9 storage rack. All it needs now is to mount it on some drawer slides and put it in the cabinet. And here it is with all the attachments. As you can see, all nicely fitting into the storage rack. And so here is the finished product, all installed in the cabinet on drawer slides. Everything nicely organized and all complete.